like a number of students to stay around just a little bit. We were kind of rushed last night with tons of people and crowded conditions, and we didn't have much of an opportunity to get a lot of photos. And so we would like to have, for our Riall collection, photos of our Riall lecturer with students here. So invite you all to stay. Sorry, no late breakfast, but we'd love to have you stay around and visit with Dr. Tomlinson a little bit after her presentation. So again, thank you, and Dr. Galito will introduce our Riall lecturer.
Good morning. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Ann Tomlinson. She is a former teacher, an outstanding educator who has taken the nation by storm. She's going to talk to you a little bit about how you can make a difference in your classrooms by thinking of teaching in different ways and trying to reach each and every student in your classroom. Please join me in welcoming Riall Tomlinson.
Can you hear me okay without the microphone, or would it be better if I used it? Guys in the back? Okay, we're okay? Okay. If it gets quiet, just let me know. I can plug in the mic and I can yell a little bit louder. What I'd like to do for a couple of minutes is just share with you some things that I see teachers do that can help students who have different needs. But particularly what I'd like to be able to do is to take some questions from you, things that you think about as you ponder, how would I do this in a classroom, or how would this work, or what do you tell the students about this or that or the other thing. And so while I'm chatting with you for a few minutes, how about if you think a little bit of some of the things where you start thinking, gosh, if I had to go in and teach tomorrow, I kind of get the idea different kids need different things, but I wouldn't know how to go about starting this, or I wouldn't know how you would handle this situation. And if you have some questions, that probably will get us closer to your needs than if I just talk with you. But let me kind of start off for a couple of minutes and just talk with you a little bit about the notions of differentiation. Were any of you here last night? Okay, so I don't need to start back at the beginning. The notion with differentiation really just is that kids aren't a match set. And even when people give us classes that are supposed to be sort of kids who are alike, it somehow kind of turns out that they aren't very much. I used to have some classes that were supposed to be remedial classes, a couple of classes a day. And every time I would have students who were in deep, deep trouble in those classes, hardly knew the alphabet, could barely read at all. And I had other students who seemed to me to be perfectly competent. I never could even figure out what was wrong, why they were there, unless maybe they had misbehaved the year before. And those kids really did not need me in the same way. If I just stood up and did the same thing for all of them all the time, it really didn't work very well. And every once in a while I'd get an advanced class, and you'd think, well, surely there, everybody's going to be in fine shape. But some of those kids were only in those classes because their moms wanted them there, and they didn't particularly want to be there, or they might be in an advanced English class, but what they were really good in was math, and they just didn't really have much extra zip for English. Had kids in classes who were bright, but just really creative, and they didn't want to necessarily follow directions. They wanted to do everything their way. And to teach them all exactly alike just never made much sense to me. The funny thing is that even at the university, where you'd think, not only do I teach at a university level, but I teach graduate students, and so you'd think, well, surely by that point, you could do the same thing with everybody. But I have students in my graduate classes who came straight from undergraduate school there, and they've never taught a day. And I have students in my graduate classes that have been teaching for 25 years. I have some people who are really excellent, excellent teachers, but they are awful writers. And if I just throw an assignment out and I don't help them with that writing, they don't get any better, and they might even sink. I have students in my classes at the university who come to this country not speaking any English, and yet they're going to do doctoral studies in a language that they don't even understand. And if I just keep talking to them 100 miles an hour, which I'm prone to do, they go away at the end of the day with their heads spinning around, and they have absolutely no idea what's going on. So, and I have students who are very secure, I have one gal whose name is Jessica, who is the world's biggest critic. And last year when she first came, I really found myself almost being a 7th grade teacher trying to protect the other kids from her and trying to protect her from the other kids, because whatever you do, she can say, well, now, if you've done this differently, if you've done this better, I don't think this is very sound, I don't think you did this very well, and the other kids are getting ready to go, because they want to mow her down. Come to find out, she's more critical of herself than she is of anybody else. They've gotten used to her now, but I spent a lot of my time last year trying to interpret her to them and them to her. The point is that when you get a whole bunch of people in a classroom, they just don't have exactly the same needs every day. And that's particularly happening now because we have such a proliferation of special ed students. We've got so many more kids with so many more identified issues than we had even when you guys were entering school. When I started teaching, and when I look at you at your age, I'm suddenly very ancient, but when I started teaching, there was no such thing in school as a learning disability. The label didn't even exist. And now it sort of seems like somebody's manufacturing the kids through the back door somewhere in there. The whole time I was teaching, the entire time I was teaching, there was no such label as Asperger's. Never even heard of it until about 4 or 5 years ago. So there's so many different kinds of things happening, along with economic gaps and language issues and kids who are bright and need to move ahead. So the point of differentiation is just trying to figure out how all of us, you as well as those of us who've been in it a long time, can be more things to more people than we tend to think of teachers being. I met a woman early in my teaching who became a friend of mine, but the first day I met her, she was there because she was the mother of a kid I was teaching. And I found out a couple of things about her that day that just really blew me away. I met her at 8 in the morning, and she was dressed and her hair was combed and she had on makeup and she looked good. And I discovered at that point that she had 8 children. And I thought, you get up, you get 8 kids out of the house, you get to school by 8 o'clock and you look decent, that's really impressive. And then in a little bit, she said something to me that finished blowing me away. She said her kids always had a choice of what to eat for dinner. And I thought, holy Moses, she's got 8 kids and she runs a short order kitchen or something. Her kids always have a choice of what to eat. And she looked at me and she shrugged and she said, they've always had a choice. Take it or leave it. And it's occurred to me that we do take it or leave it teaching. I fixed this perfectly good lesson for today. And if you're hungry, you'll eat it. And if you're not, well, maybe you'll get hungry tomorrow and come back and eat. But the trouble is, it just doesn't work very well that day. So what we really need now is teachers who know how to be flexible in the classroom. I was talking with one of the former students from here last night. It's his 3rd year of teaching, and he was telling me that he was teaching in summer school this summer. And he said, I know summer school is a really strange institution anyhow, because things happen so fast and kids are there for a variety of reasons, and a lot of them are pretty discouraged anyhow, which is why they're there. And he said, but I had some kids who have already taken the subject that I taught and just didn't do well in it, and other kids who've never taken it yet. And I have some kids who don't speak English at all and are just clueless, not only about the language, but they were studying a Western history, and they come from an Eastern world, and so they don't even have any context for it. And he said, I just really had an awful time because I understood that I needed to do different things for different kids, but when I stopped to work with these kids on language and what the book says, the kids who were more able were poking each other with pencils and throwing things. And if I stopped to do something with the kids who were more able and needed some extra help, then the kids who didn't know how to read the book degenerated pretty quickly as well. What he had not had a chance to think about was how he might introduce a lesson to a whole class and then have 2 different legitimate activities at the same time, where he might start with this group while he has a pretty hefty assignment for this group, and then once he gets these kids going, go back over and work with these guys a little bit, push them a little bit further forward. All he could see in his head was, if I stop and these kids sit there and wait, it doesn't work very well. And if I stop and work with these kids and these guys sit there and wait, it doesn't work very well. So it takes a while to kind of think through the routines. But the trick is to try to see if you can, maybe juggle 2 balls or 3 balls or 4 balls at once instead of just 1 ball, or if you can spin 2 plates at the same time instead of just 1 plate, and still figure out how to manage it. Let me stop for a second and see what questions you guys have, what rolls around in your heads when you think about yourselves in a classroom and kids with different needs. Questions about planning time, about using materials, questions about what you tell kids somewhere in that whole mix about why they're not all doing the same thing, questions about standardized tests and differentiation. What's in your head? What questions do you have? Let me get you for just a minute so you can kind of hatch what matters to you, to just kind of turn to a couple of people near you and just chat for a minute. If you think about yourself entering a classroom with lots of different kids, with lots of different needs, what questions are trucking around in your head right now? Talk with each other about that for just a minute, and then I'll get you back up here in a minute and get you to toss out some of those questions and let me deal with them for you. Take just a minute and talk with each other. If you need to move to find a human, do that. Let's see who's feeling courageous. If you can hear me, clap twice. Great. That works really well, by the way, when you're in a room that you need to get people back. I have a friend who, in a classroom where lots is going on, one of the questions is if you have kids working, you know, and they're kind of talking and you want to get them back together, how can you do that? And some teachers flick a light switch. Some teachers have a little bell that they jingle. I've always done the clap twice thing. That'll hush a stadium in a hurry. But I have a friend who does this thing that just amazes me. It would never work for me at all. I don't know why it does for her. But she says to the kids from the front of the room, and then a hush fell over the room. And all the kids are supposed to say, hush. And every time she does it, the room gets deathly quiet. And every time I do it, my voice gets lost in the noise and nobody ever even knew I asked them. So the clapping thing works better for me. What are some questions that you have that you would like to just hear somebody toss around?
How do you cater to specific learning styles when there's not enough time in the classroom to even get the curriculum that is required of you to be taught across a certain time so the kids can take the tests that they need to pass to move on? How do you balance all of that?
Okay, that's let me ask you a question about your question for just a minute. Is your question really, how can you both differentiate instruction and get the standards taken care of? Or is your question, how do you manage to deal with kids' different modes of learning? The first one. A couple of people were asking me that last night too, and that's actually a question that you would find in any room full of veteran teachers right now. But here's the deal. If you know what your goals are, you know, if you know what you're trying to teach to, you kind of have two choices. One is you can say, I'm going to blaze down that trail like gangbusters, and I'm going to go as hard as I can and as fast as I can, and I hope all the kids will follow me. And some of them will, but you lose right many of them along the way, because if the kids sort of quit understanding you in mid-September and the test isn't until May, they just get further and further behind. And for a lot of kids who know the stuff already, it's just awful to have to sit there and keep rehearsing it while everybody else is picking it up for the first time. So one option is, I'm going to cover it and they should follow me. A much better option probably is, I know what my goals are, but every once in a while I'm going to stop along the way and I'm going to do something to assess the kids to see where they are, not regarding me, but where they are regarding this week's part of the stuff. And if some kids already know some stuff, it's really not terribly hard to give them something that extends their learning while you sit down and reteach a few kids who didn't get it in the first place, and some other kids just do a little bit more practice, for example. What we tend to find is that you do, in fact, have a similar set of goals for the standards test. That's just the way life is right now. But you do better if you help different kids get there in different ways, rather than just assuming that just because you've covered it, they'll go with you. So there really, in truth, probably is a greater need for differentiation when you have the same set of goals with the same test given under the same conditions on the same date for everybody. That flies in the face of human differences right there. So what we tend to find is that kids will do better if you keep checking to see who's got it, who doesn't have it along the way, and then give them a different homework assignment to work on what they need. That doesn't cost you any class time. You know, if some kids are missing this part and some kids need this, you can have 2 homework assignments just fine as opposed to just 1. Or you might have one time during the week where you give the kids practice work in class on whatever the goals are, but you meet with 2 groups separately during that time to really kind of help them. A teacher at our summer institute drew a really interesting definition of differentiation a couple of years ago. She said she drew a little stick figure in the middle of the page, and at the top of the page it said learning goal. And she said, I had always seen myself as being the person who was supposed to propel the kid to the learning goal. So coming out of her hand, she drew a ball headed up to the learning goal in a little straight line. You know, I'm supposed to get them straight there. She said, what I've found since I started working with differentiation is it's still my job to get them all to the same goal. And some of them still go straight there, but some of them will do better if I let them go that way, and some of them will do better if I let them go that way. I'm still trying to get them all to the same place, and I'm still trying to get them there as much as I can by the same time. But if I give them different support systems in doing it, every indication is they'll do better. So there's really not a conflict between differentiation and standards. Probably the biggest conflict is between trying to cover standards for kids, which we all feel compelled to do, and what we know about good curriculum. We violate the heck out of good curriculum when we just keep covering facts and asking kids to memorize them. There is a conflict there, but differentiation just says whatever it is you're trying to teach, try to do it in enough different ways so everybody can get as close as possible. Does that make sense at all? Other questions? Yeah.
We feel that we are to a different set of learning styles, whatever, with a specific group of kids, and we think that they could benefit from a different way of testing instead of what the other class. Do we have the autonomy as teachers to change the testing for them? It's been my experience that we always have to go to a meeting. What if they don't even have an IEP? I mean, can we change the testing or to suit their needs without all that?
Yeah, let me, unless you're talking about the standardized test, if it's the state test, you can't do anything with that. They'll put you under the jailhouse, your son. But up to that point, let me just be sure that you hear somebody say to you, which I'm sure you hear in classes 500 times, you're training to be professionals. And a professional means that you have a body of knowledge that you leave here with, and that hopefully you'll keep studying for the rest of your lives. You're not finished when you leave here, you're just starting. But a professional is somebody who masters the best body of knowledge of their field and then uses their professional judgment on how to apply it. I don't want to go to a doctor who's a professional and say they only taught me one cure, so whatever you've got, I'm going to treat you the same way, you know, because I don't think I'm going to get well too fast. A professional uses their knowledge and adapts it to the needs of the clients, and that's what you really are supposed to do. Your question turns out to be a pretty intriguing question, because now what a lot of teachers will say is, you know, I know the kids would do better if I had the test in 2 formats, or if I read it to these kids, or if kids could draw something to show their answer as well as writing something. But I can't do that because the standardized test is coming, and on the standardized test, there's no variance. So all I can do all year long is test like the standardized test. And there's a pretty good body of research as well as some common sense that speaks directly to that. And what researchers have found, among them Robert Sternberg from Yale, whose work is very strong, what you find is that if you make the activity and the test the closest fit possible for the kids until you get to the standardized test, they'll do better on the standardized test than if you kept giving them the wrong format all the way there. And the reason for that is 2 things, and your common sense would probably tell you this. Your job is not to be a standardized tester. Your job is to be a teacher, which means to get kids to learn. Well, if you give me an assessment that works for me, I learn more from that assessment than if I have an assessment where I think, I don't know, I quit, I'll just wait here for 20 minutes. So one thing is that if the assessment fits my needs, I'm learning better. And that means when I get to that final test, I'm going to be stronger. I will have learned more. Second thing is you're building my confidence in that. You know, I did okay on this thing. I can see some room for improvement, but I did okay. And so then when I get to the standardized test, you haven't proven to me for 9 successive months that I'm hopeless. You've proven to me that I can frequently do well on tests. Now these days, I would still do some test prep with kids to get them ready for that format. And I would still from time to time let them have a practice thing that lets them see what that's like. But a big piece of my philosophy is teaching for success. In other words, I don't know how you feel about this or what your experience as kids in public school classrooms was, but when I started teaching, I think I was a pretty good practitioner of what I've come to call gotcha teaching. And what I did was, you know, I would teach the kids, and I was really very serious about that, and I liked them really well, but somehow in my head, I saw a test as something that was supposed to kind of trick them. And a really good test was one that was so devious that even the most able kids would have to go, I don't have a clue on some of these questions. And then it's sort of like a contest between you and the kids, and you put the test out there and you give it to them and you say, see, he's smart, but he couldn't get that question. I won somehow there. That's gotcha teaching. See, I gotcha. You couldn't do it. I snuck under you. I crept around you there, and I kept you from being perfect. What I've come to understand is that my job is to know the goal I want kids to get to, and to teach in ways that gets the most kids there. And that I'm a much better teacher if I can say, by George, they all learned it, rather than by saying, by George, I tricked 4 of them and they couldn't show me. So teaching for success has a real important testing principle, and that is, if I want you to understand how day and night and seasons happen in the solar system, that's what I should be measuring. If I ask you to write me a page-long essay to explain that, and you have that knowledge in your head, you actually know how the solar system works to create day and night and seasons, but you can't write the essay because you don't speak English well or you have a learning disability, you're going to get an F on that thing or a D, not because you didn't understand how day and night and seasons happens, but because the essay got in your way. If I could say to you, you can either write me a prose explanation, which would have these elements, or you can draw and illustrate how it works with labels that make it very clear to a reader what's going on, then I've done teaching for success. I've enabled you to show me how the solar system thing works because you've been able to use a preferred mode or to get around a problem that you have. And in my opinion, that's an extremely important thing. So yeah, you be a professional, you do what makes sense to you. Now, typically, the one thing the experts will tell you is you shouldn't change your learning goal. If the goal is for all the kids to learn how day and night and seasons works, you probably need to hang in with that unless you have a kid with an IEP that gives you instructions to deviate. But how you test it, how you teach it, how the kids practice it, how you learn it, that's what professionalism is. You study and use your own judgment there. Other questions?
I think you talked last night about the effects of tracking on kids on like long-term, how it broadens the achievement gap. How do we give different instruction to different kids without them self-tracking themselves? Say if we give them different reading groups.
Great question.
How do we keep kids from always thinking, well, I wasn't in the smart reading group, I was in the I was in the average reading group in elementary school, so I'll never be able to succeed when I get into it.
That's a really great question, and a very important one to keep asking yourself. And what I tell my students really often is sometimes your question is more important than my answer, because there are lots of ways to answer that question. What matters is that you go into a classroom saying, I don't want these kids to sort of peg themselves as this kind of kid or this kind of kid. I want them to see themselves as having possibilities and growing and that kind of thing. And as long as you're going into the classroom with that mindset, you'll keep studying it and find your own ways. But let me give you a couple of answers on that. One real important principle for differentiation for me is the principle of flexible grouping. And what I mean by flexible grouping is that I'm going to plan my lessons and I'm going to say, okay, here are my goals, and on Monday we're going to do this, and on Tuesday we're going to do this, and on Wednesday we're going to do this. We're used to planning like that and sort of allotting how much happens on which day and which materials to use which day. Another piece of planning needs to be, so how am I going to arrange and rearrange the kids over the next 2 weeks? And sometimes I want to put them in similar readiness groups. I want all the kids who are having trouble with this math idea to be together today to work on just what they need. But tomorrow I'm going to mix the groups up, and I'm going to have the kids in some mixed readiness groups to help each other with some problem solving where they have to represent the problem in 2 or 3 ways, and different kids can contribute to the different ways they represent the problems. And then maybe 2 days later, I'm going to say to the kids, you pick whoever you want to work with, and so the kids just kind of keep moving around. If you continue to arrange and rearrange them, you can keep them from being bluebirds and buzzards and wombats. And that's what your goal is, to move them continuously, so that sometimes they're in similar readiness groups, but sometimes intentionally they're in dissimilar readiness groups. And sometimes they're together based on their interests. And sometimes they're together based on how they learn. Sometimes they're together because you told them to work together, and other times because of their choice. I'll tell you the story. I hope this will happen to you. Most of what I know about teaching that I'm sure about, my students taught. I didn't learn it out of a textbook. I learned it from the kids. And almost always for me, there's a story that goes with that. There's a minute from my teaching where I think, that's important to remember. They're telling me something here that's important. One night, we were having a parent night at school, and typically when we did, just the parents came. But for some reason, on this particular night, this kid came with his mom, and before the meeting started, which was downstairs in the auditorium, he brought his mom up to our classroom to look at the stuff that was hanging in there because he thought it was a cool room. So once he brought her in, I kind of introduced myself and chatted with him for a minute, but then I got out of the way so he could tour her through the room, you know, and show her what he thought was neat. But I was kind of eavesdropping from the corner, and as they got ready to leave, they said goodbye to me, and then I heard him say to her as he left the room, you know what she does when she goes home at night? And I thought, holy cow, what in the world does he think I do with my time? You know, I'm seeing my job go down the tubes. Heaven knows what he thought I did. So I kind of went over to the door to see what he was going to say to her. And as he was leaving, he said, when she goes home at night, she stays up late trying to think of one more way to shake us all up. And where that came from was, those of you who heard me last night, I had a very bimodal class. I had kids who were in deep trouble with learning and kids who were way ahead and almost nobody in the middle. And if I hadn't been careful, I'd have had bluebirds and buzzards all the time. That's all there would have been. So I would purposely think of different ways for the kids to learn where they all had stuff to contribute, and I'd keep moving them around. But I had not talked to them directly about that. I had to learn over time to talk to the kids about why I did what I did. The more I talked to them about my reasoning, the easier it was for them to be a part of what I was doing. But at that point, I just kept coming in every few days, and I'd say to the kids, you know, guys, I went home last night, and I started thinking about it, and you've been sitting in the same places with the same kids for the last 3 days, and I'm kind of bored. So I had this brainstorm, and here's how we're going to shake it up. And I guess I did that often enough, so he thought my evening recreation was just moving the kids. But once he said that, I knew that was something important to him, that it kept moving. It's something he chose to tell his mom. It had registered with him. And here's the deal. That kid knows what kind of reader he is. He knows what kind of math student he is. We all know that. I taught preschoolers, and those 4-year-olds could tell me who should be the person to help you if you needed help with reading, and who should be the person to help you on the playground, and who should be the person to help you if you need something drawn. They knew that at 4 years old. So it's no big aha that the kids know if they're good with something or not. But what was happening to this kid was he didn't only see himself as a good reader or a pretty good reader or a not so good reader, because that was only one of many things that was happening in the classroom. And by continually moving the kids, he saw himself in many different settings. And so that's one of the really big principles. The other part of what you said, or how you asked your question, is related to student choice. And here's what I think about that. Kids need to learn to make good choices. And if they don't learn to make good choices, if we don't teach them that, many of them never learn. So we need to actually teach them what would make a good group for you today. Who will you choose to be with so that you can meet the requirements of the assignment? What would a good grouping for you be like? And try to help the kids make that choice. But the other piece is you're still the adult. You're still the teacher. You're still the person who has the assessment data in your hands. And so sometimes you want kids to make a choice and you want to help them learn to make it. but sometimes it's your job to make it for them. And so some days I'm just going to say, here are the groupings for today. Please work in those groupings. They're the ones I believe will help you go the next step the most. And at other points, I want them to make the choices. The most common question I'm asked by veteran teachers about that is bright kids who choose work that's too easy for them all the time. Why do you suppose smart kids would consistently choose tasks that are too easy?
Afraid of failure.
You betcha. They like that A thing, you know, and so why would you take a chance of jeopardizing that? Plus, people expect me to be perfect, and so if I try something hard, maybe they'll find out I'm not perfect, so I think I'll just go to this task. It's easier, safer, guaranteed A, don't think I want any. And so I've frequently spent a lot of time in classes saying to bright kids, you know, if I were Dean Smith and you were Michael Jordan, you would never stay in my basketball place. If I said to you, boy, Michael, you know, you play a pretty mean game of basketball, and, you know, I think you're better than the other kids on this team, and I don't want to stress you any, you know, I don't want to get you stretched out or anything, so I tell you what, you sit on the bench over there, and as soon as the other kids catch up with you, then I'll give you something to do. Michael Jordan knows he has a talent, and he wants a coach that's going to work the socks off of him, because he wants that talent developed. And that ought to be happening with reading and math and science and art and everything else we do too. So I said to my kiddos, the story is, babe, you were Michael Jordan, and I hate to tell you, but I'm Dean Smith, and I'm going to be all over you because I'm not going to let you get out of here without developing your capacities. Now that doesn't mean that every bright kid has to work like a dynamo every day. Everybody's entitled to a slot day. And if a kid just every once in a while chooses something that's a blow-off, I don't care. You know, I want to be a slob every once in a while too. Sometimes I get up on Saturdays and think, I just cannot do another thing this week. I just can't, and I'm worthless, and then I'm better on Sunday or whatever. But if I find a bright kid with a pattern of choosing stuff that's too easy, then I want to work with that kid on that. And I can remember a kid particularly whom I taught, who was Erica, who was so smart and so lazy. And every time she had a choice, despite my preaching and my encouraging, she would always choose something that was easy. And 9 times out of 10, I'd go by and I'd say, Erica, that lazy little worm we keep talking about, that sucker's alive and well today, isn't it? You chose something that isn't going to stretch your brain cells at all. So I tell you what, tomorrow it's my choice. Today you got to pick this. Tomorrow life's going to go belly up. Have a nice day. Have a nice day. And then the next day when it was my turn to choose, I'd give her something that caused her to have to work up. Important lesson there, though, is when you, because of what you're saying about kids that are afraid to fail, it's important when you raise the challenge for bright kids to raise the support system too, because what you want to do is have them succeed in a new level of complexity. You don't want to have them fail at a new level of complexity. So you don't want to kind of like punish them and give them really hard stuff and say, see, you couldn't do it, you're not so smart after all. What you want to do is give them something challenging and then help them succeed there so that they realize that they have more capacity than they think they do. Long answer, but that's a really critical part of differentiation, is not to foster bluebirds, buzzards, and wombats all the time. Other questions? I'll try to be shorter. Life's good? No other malfunctions? Yes. Okay, try me. That's one of the most fundamental questions. Let me repeat her question for you. You're in a classroom that's differentiated. By definition, your kids are going to be doing different things sometimes. Well, that's not how kids think you're supposed to do school. And we kind of got this notion in school that fair is everybody does everything exactly like under the same conditions. And kids know that when they're little. If you put them on the front porch to play school, the teacher stands there and says, do this way. And if somebody's bad, she kicks them off the porch. So they come to us and we say, you know, maybe you'll have 2 homework assignments tonight, or I think right now I want some of you to practice this and some of you to practice this. And the kids are kind of going, well, that guy doesn't even know how to teach. She doesn't even know how to play school. What's wrong with her? So at some point, what I found was that it was extremely important not even to wait for the kids to ask me that question, but to raise the issue with them early on. And I did that a lot of ways, and I'll tell you a couple of the ways that I did it. I kept trying to invent new ways so I didn't bore myself to death after 100 years of teaching, but one of the things that I used to do was the first day of school, among other things, I would give my kids a big piece of paper, and I would tell them that for homework, I wanted them to graph themselves, and that to show them what I meant, I was going to graph myself on the overhead projector to kind of model for them. And on the horizontal axis, I would put how good I am at, and then I would put about 6 subsets of my subject. So if I was teaching English, how good I am at comprehension, how good I am at vocabulary, how good I am at spelling, at grammar, at interpreting literature, at writing poetry, at public speaking. I'd put a bunch of things on the bottom of that we were going to work with. And then I'd intersperse it with about 3 things that had nothing to do with English. How good I am at math, how good I am at soccer, how good I am at cleaning my room were 3 that I usually put on there. And then I left some blank places at the end of the line. And on the vertical axis, the kids could label it, you know, whatever terrific was and whatever yucky was, and so they would label degrees of goodness or badness on that thing. And I would graph myself for them. And it served several purposes for me to graph myself for them. One was it modeled the homework assignment. But the other was it let me talk to them about myself so I became a little bit more human. So for example, if I did how good I am at spelling, I would start off by saying to the kids, let me tell you first that I chose to be an English teacher. And if I'm not pretty good in most of these English-related things, you're going to have a real bad year, because I'm supposed to be good at this to teach you. So you should worry if I'm in almost everything here. It's going to be kind of a long haul. On the other hand, I'm a human being, and I've got lots left to learn, and I'm not perfect, and I change over time. And I would say to them, my hope for you is that you'll grow up and find the job that's right for you. So every morning you can get up and say, you know, I'm pretty good at this, and I really like it. But when I got to the how good I am at spelling, I would say to the kids when I was in 1st grade and 3rd grade and 5th grade, I was way up here. I was terrific with spelling. Now, I guess I'm kind of maybe about here, and I'd go kind of 2/3 of the way up the axis. And I'd say to the kids, why do you suppose I've gotten worse in spelling over time? Seems like you kind of get better, doesn't it? And they ponder that. And typically, and you'll experience this way too soon, the kids look at you and say, because you're getting old. And that's really irritating when you're 26. That's really irritating. By the time you're 126, you can kind of buy that. But I would say to them, you know what the deal is that if you're good at spelling, that means you pick up patterns like this. You see a spelling pattern and your head says, ooh, got that. And so when I was learning from a spelling list, I picked up all the right patterns, and I could just pop those suckers back. But now I've been checking 7th grade spelling for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, and nobody spells anything alike. And all those crazy patterns keep sticking in my head because all patterns stick there. And now everything looks okay. And every year I get a little bit worse in spelling. And so we would do that through those areas. And I had some things purposely planted in there to tell them things that mattered to me a lot, things that scared me, things that people had helped me with. And then I'd send them home to graph themselves. And the graphs were big, and they'd bring them back the next day. And then every day for the next 2 or 3 weeks, I'd give 5 kids a graph back, and they would stand up and tell us one thing on their graph, just about one piece of it. And while they did that, I took notes. Who's got a big vocabulary, who's scared to death in front of a group, whose grammar is a little bit rocky, who's a ham, you know, and has a good sense of humor. Just took some little notes on it. But ultimately, we put the graphs all around the room, all 150 of them. And I gave the kids an index card, and I said, okay, I want you to go on a gallery walk. I want you to walk around the room and look at as many of the graphs as you have time to look at in the next 5 or 6 minutes. And I want you to write on your index card any way that you can complete this sentence. As you study the graphs, how can you correctly complete this sentence? And the sentence was, in general, it's true that. So what can you say in general it's true that when you look at the graph? So they'd sit back down, and they'd say all kinds of things. In general, it's true that more people in 2nd period like math than 3rd period. In general, it's true that more boys say they're great with soccer than girls. In general, it's true that more people like spelling than grammar or whatever it was. You know, they find all kind of patterns. Those are generalizations that they're drawing. I was waiting for one comment, and as soon as the kids made this one comment, I had the year, and I had the answer to the beginning of the answer to the question you're asking. Every single time, 5 hours a day, for 20 years, somebody said what I needed them to say. There was never a class where they didn't say it. And what I was waiting for them to say was, in general, it's true that everybody says they're better in some things and worse in others. Everybody has high points and low points. Almost always somebody would say, hey, you know what? Not a single person drew a straight line and said, that's me, I'm the same in everything. And as soon as they said that, I was halfway home, and I'd say to them, you know what? I think about that a really lot. And I asked myself as a teacher, how will I be the best teacher? If I've got a couple of you in here who are dynamite with spelling, and a couple of you who could study a list all weekend and you'd lose it out of your head on the way to school, what should I do about that? If I have some of you who think public speaking is the coolest thing we're going to do all year, and others of you who are already biting your fingernails because you're terrified of it, what should I do about that? And I'm not kidding you, 5 hours a day for 20 years, the kids said exactly the same thing back to me. Never did a kid look at me and say, what do you mean, woman? Don't pay any attention to the differences. Just teach us all the same thing. Never did a kid even go in that direction. Every single time what they said is, well, if we're bad at something, you need to help us get better. If we're okay, you need to get us keep growing. And then I would say to them, so how do we do that? How would you do that in a classroom? Because I think lots of times in classrooms you just keep doing all the same thing at the same time. How am I going to help you if you need extra help? And how can I help you move on if you're good in something? And together we worked out what that classroom would look like. It would mean sometimes we'd have different homework assignments. It means sometimes we would maybe read 2 different books or 4 different books. It means sometimes we might not even have the same spelling list as each other if we need to start in different places to grow. And so for me, from early on, not my first year of teaching or my second year, but once differentiation got to be something that was really important to me as a teacher, I had that conversation with kids the first couple of weeks of school. And together, we developed the class. And if you had come into my classroom and had seen the kids doing different things, and you had walked up to a kid and said, how come you all aren't all writing exactly the same thing today? My students could have answered you as easily as I could, because they helped me develop that plan. What they understood was she's trying to figure out where we need to go, where we are, and she's trying to help us take our next step. And our role is to help her know better how to do that, and so we're all working to be able to grow. There are always issues that come up in a classroom. There's never such a thing as a perfect day or a perfect year or a perfect class, so you always have questions. But I can honestly say to you, once I started really talking with the kids and letting them help me see what a good class would look like, they almost never came up with that kind of question. The biggest issue we would have with that would be sometimes I might, for example, have some kids, using calligraphy pens and to do something because they needed practice with writing, and the calligraphy pens made it better. And on that day, some other kids might not be using the calligraphy pens. So how do you suppose the kids that don't have the pens feel about the kids who do right then? I'm going to have to use the pens. It's not that the assignment's different, it's that the cool toy is different. So I used to say to the kids, again, up front, some days you might find a few kids using a video camera and you aren't using it, or you might find them use calligraphy pens, you're not using it today. You've got a couple of choices. You can assume that I know 7th graders, and that I know 7th graders are going to want their turn with those things, and that surely I must be fair enough to have a plan so that you'll get your turn. But just in case I don't look trustworthy, just in case you don't want to trust me, then come to me before class or after class and just say, Ms. T, I'm kind of concerned because I really like those pens and I didn't get to use them today. When am I going to get to use them? And the kids would do that a few times. And my answer to them was always the same. Thanks for telling me. I'm really glad you let me know that was important to you. I tell you what, let me go home tonight and check my materials, and I'll come back and tell you tomorrow when you're going to use it. What I really needed to say to them, but wasn't quite willing to be blunt enough, was I don't have a clue when you're going to use them, but give me 30 minutes and I'll figure it out and I'll come back and tell you tomorrow. And once they realized that I knew that that rotation needed to happen, then they were okay about that. But I almost never got a question of why do we have 2 homework assignments or why are we reading 2 different books. Did occasionally get how come she's using the camera and I'm not. If your teaching makes sense and you can help your kids see the sense in it, then they can go with you better. A second way that I used to work with students to help them understand those differences, and I did this with parents. By the way, sometimes you have to help parents understand what you're doing too, because every person in this country is an expert on school. And we're the only profession that that's true for, because every person in this country has been to school probably at least for 12 years, if not more. And so we all know how school's supposed to be. And some quit teacher comes in and starts messing with it, and parents think, she doesn't know what she's doing, he's crazy, I can't trust him. So if you can kind of help parents go with you, it makes a difference. And frequently when parents would come for the first back to school night, I would use a strategy with them. And by the way, sometimes I left the graphs up and let them see their students' graphs and had the same conversation with them. How would you teach these kids if they're this different? But another thing that I did with the parents and with the kids was I'd find a great big sweater. Schools are full of lost and found items, and you can get anything you need out of the lost and found. So I would go to the lost and found, and I'd find the largest jacket or the largest sweater that I could find. And then I'd find the tiniest jacket. And in a middle school, you can get itty-bitty jackets and great big jackets because you've got kids all over the place. And I'd bring the 2 jackets in, and when the parents came, I'd ask a very large parent and a very tiny parent to come to the front of the room. And I'd get the tiny parent to put on the great big jacket and the great big parent to put on the tiny jacket. And then I'd ask them how that felt and how it would be, you know, for a couple of minutes. It's kind of funny. What if you had to wear it all day? What if you had to wear it for a whole week? What if you had to wear it for a month, for 9 months? And so you're walking around like this the whole time, or you're tripping over your sleeves the whole time. How would that start to feel after a while? After it quit being funny, what would it be like? And then I would just say to the parents, why do you suppose I'm asking you that? And they knew, they could tell me. And so we'd have a conversation about the fact that just like their kids are very different sizes physically, they're very different sizes with learning needs right now. And my best job as a teacher is to try to find a garment that will fit them and then help them grow into the next size garment, rather than putting something on them that makes them feel sloppy and stupid. And I would do that with the kids as well. And truly, once I said to them, why did we do this? They always got it. Third thing I used to do with that, just in case you want to try some stuff, is I'd do these little role play scenarios, and I did this with parents and with kids sometimes. I would be a physician, and I'd put whoever was doing it with me, whether it was parents or kids, I'd put them in pairs. And one person would be assigned to be a parent, and the other would be assigned to be a kid. And they would have a little role play card that they would look at, and they could get their heads together for just a second. Then they'd come back in and they'd role play this doctor visit with me. And in every case except the last pair, the parent was supposed to do all the talking and the kid was just supposed to be doing some action. So the kid would come up and be scratching, and the parent would say, you know, I think maybe he's got poison ivy. I don't know where he got it, but he's got these big runny things all over his arm, and he's never had it before, but it really looks like poison ivy to me, and he's just miserable. What do you think? And I'd look at it and I'd say, boy, that must feel terrible. I tell you what, here's some cold medicine. Go ahead and take that and see if it helps. And I'd send them off, and they're kind of, next one would come up and say, I think maybe my son's allergic to strawberries. We don't ever have them at home because his dad has an allergy, but he was at his grandmom's this weekend, and she fed him the strawberries, and he's had this gosh awful stomach ache ever since then, and he can hardly stand up. What do you think? And I'd say, boy, I'm so sorry. That's a terrible way to spend a weekend. Here's some cold medicine. Go ahead and take that. We get about 8 people with different diseases. I'm giving them the cold medicine no matter what the disease is. Finally, the last kid that would come in spoke for himself and said, you know, my mom thinks maybe I have the flu or asthma or whatever. I actually think it's just a cold, and here's my reasoning for that. Here's where I was exposed to it. Here's how long it's taken. I kind of think it's just a cold. What can you do? I'd hand the kid a cold tablet, and you could see everybody going, finally it's going to work. And the point that I would make to them was there's no point in a teacher or a parent always having to speak for a kid. A kid can give you lots of good information about themselves. But typically what I would say is, so what would you do for me if I were your doctor? and you watch people come through all day, and no matter what disease they had, I gave them a cold tablet. Tell you a funny thing about that. When I first started teaching, the parents or the kids would say, we wouldn't go back to that person anymore. That's a terrible doctor. We wouldn't go back. My parents wouldn't take me back there again. By the time I finished teaching, they'd say, we'd sue the socks off of him. The suit thing had gotten kind of big over the years there somehow. But again, they understood. And what I would say is, I'm a diagnostician and a prescriber. And I need to diagnose what your child needs and prescribe that. I don't need to keep giving everybody the same cold medicine. So I think you can help kids understand that way, but I think you can really help parents understand what you're trying to do as well. Any other scathingly brilliant questions? Or semi-brilliant questions? Or dorky questions?
How do you feel with discipline as far as a child, student interrupting you while you're teaching?
Yeah. You know, that's a hard question because every child who disrupts us while we teach is doing it for some reason. And one of the things I came to understand is when there's a disruptive kid, I've got two issues. One is to stop the disruption, but the other one is to understand the disruption so in the longer term, I can work with it better. And one of the things that I learned over time was that frequently it's my response that escalates a situation. And so I learned, I'll tell you a moment from a film that I really love. This was another one of those light bulb moments for me. I don't know if you've seen Stand and Deliver, Jaime Escalante's story. But in that story, he starts off teaching a bunch of kids who are mad as the devil and they hate school and they hate adults and they hate the system. And the first day of class is kind of chaotic. And so he, an angry kid comes up and he starts to hand the kid some books. And as he hands the kid the books, the kid puts his hand down. So the books fall on the floor. Now, most of the time as a teacher, what we want to say is, well, that was a pretty stupid thing to do, for heaven's sakes. You know I was going to hand them to you. What'd you do that for? And then you've got a fight going. What Escalante does is reach down and pick up the books and hand them to the kid as though it never happened and keep going with the comment he made, which was what's really important. And so I learned over time how to respond to disruptive kids in a way that keeps the fight from happening. And the better I got at that, the fewer really disruptive incidents I had. If you have a kid who, no matter what you're doing, and no matter what anybody can help you do, for example, a counselor, a social worker, a special ed teacher, no matter what kind of help you can get, people can't stop that disruptive pattern, then I think the kid has to have some kind of a placement that doesn't stop everybody else. I'll tell you a situation that I saw with that, which was very intriguing to me. Was in Michigan, and it was a first grade class, and there was a little boy in that class who had an emotional problem that was really, really way out there. And every once in a while, he would just lose it, and you never could tell what was going to set him off. But when he lost it, he would literally scream and run around the room and scream and run up and down the hall. And for a long time, because you couldn't catch him. If you tried to catch him, you know, he'd kick you and really, so you had to kind of like wait for the battery to run down and then you could kind of work with him. The teacher in that classroom worked with his mom and worked with the other people in the school, and nobody could figure out how to get that stopped. And now, I don't know if I would have done what she did or not. I don't know if I would have been able to, but I thought her approach was interesting. She said to the kids, you know how sometimes you just get so mad you think you've got to go do something, you've got to draw an ugly picture or say something nasty to somebody, you just got it all bottled up and you can't get it in. And she got them to talk about times when they felt like they were so mad they wanted to explode and punch a brother or, you know, throw a ball and hit something in the room. And she said, you know, Johnny has, I don't remember what his name was, has an especially difficult time with that. And sometimes he feels like he's just going to lose it. And sometimes he does. And you know what? Sometimes when you feel that way, it's better if the people around you just ignore you and let you get it out of your system. And then when you get it out of your system, you're okay. You can come back and work again. So do you think if he loses it and he really is angry and he just needs to get it out of his system, do you think we could give him some time and space just to kind of feel better and then he could come back and work with us? When I was in that room, that kid would blow like a volcano and scream like a banshee and run around the room and run up and down the hall. And everybody just said, and kept right on working. And it was the weirdest thing to watch because she gave him permission to be I mean, he couldn't help himself, gave him permission, but it didn't make him look stupid in front of the other kids, and yet it didn't disrupt the work. There's something kind of nice in that sort of an approach. But I think when you've got a kid where nothing you can do and nothing anybody else can help you know how to do makes it tolerable, then you need a principal who will support you by saying, you know, got to have a situation that on a more structured way helps that kid learn how to handle him or herself so that at some appropriate point they can be part of the classroom.
I think this brings us to the end of our lecture this morning. And don't forget to go and get your book signed out there and make sure that you buy your book. You need to begin your professional library. Good strategies, and they are the kind that will not go away in a couple of years. It's good teaching, good teaching, good teaching.
The different kids aren't going away, they just aren't. How we work with them is another story, but they're not going anywhere.
Yes.